This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Coveil. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion.
My guest today is Yuri Adoni. He is a venture capitalist, an angel investor. He knows something about startups. He actually knows a lot more than something about startups. His venture firm has listed 12 companies on the NASDAQ so far and sold many others to the big companies that we all know, the Ciscos, the Microsofts, the EMCs, the PayPals. Today we get into Yuri's new book, The Unstoppable Startup. And look, he does a great job of going behind the scenes to explain what he does, his principles, his practices, that any startup anywhere in the world can use from his perspective to become an unstoppable one. I think what's also fun about this conversation is that Yuri is based in Israel, a high-tech mecca. Now, I've not yet been to Israel. I plan on going. I want to go anywhere where there's cool people like Yuri doing cool stuff. So without any further delay, let's jump right in and do a little venture capital, a little angel investing, a little how it all works, the mindset, the best practices, and go behind the scenes with Yuri Adoni. And as always, I hope you enjoy this conversation. So Yuri, I got to tell you a little story first that really triggered me on our conversation. So the first time I was in New York City, probably around 94, 95, was there a handful of times and then not really back again for another decade regularly. But both times something happened to me as a suburban guy growing up in the Washington, D.C. area, kind of in a somewhat religious school, not Jewish, but a religious school, and kind of around the same kind of thinking. I mean, all quality people, hard workers, and all that kind of stuff. But when I started going to New York and I started meeting my friends in the investing, trading, markets world that happened to be Jewish, I all of a sudden was like, what's going on here? What's this kindred spirit thing that I've been missing all along? What is this thing these people are infusing me with? I just kind of naturally assumed, okay, there's some cultural aspect here. There's a Jewish cultural aspect here. But it wasn't until I started going through your world, I thought all those guys had the Chutzpah. They all had that, what we're going to talk about today. But it's not endemic to only being Jewish. It's just a learned thought process. I don't know if you care to comment on my thinking about that, but it was something I so noticed about my friends in New York City that were Jewish when I first started going there.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting comment because one of the things I would ask is whether chutzpah is a Jewish thing or an Israeli thing, probably somewhere in the middle. I think that's definitely within the culture. You can definitely expand on what exactly it is. It's definitely something you can learn. It's not something you need to be born with.
Let's just break it apart. It's Hebrew, correct?
Chutzpah, it's Hebrew Yiddish kind of thing. Yeah, it's in Hebrew, but it's very common in the Jewish world as well.
Define it for people, because we're talking this Hebrew Yiddish term. Define chutzpah. And give me the proper pronunciation. Did I even say it right? It doesn't sound like I said it right.
Chutzpah. It's with a ch.
Chutzpah.
Yeah.
There's a little bite to it at the beginning.
Reminds a bit of the ch. The Dutch has some ch.
Define it for everybody. We might end up talking about this one word for 60 minutes, but define it for everybody.
One of the reasons I actually wrote the book is because it's actually not easy to define it. And the best way of actually explaining it is through examples. I mean, I have a couple of definitions that I can go through, but I think that maybe the closest thing to English is audacity. It's a go-to approach, kind of a bold mindset, if you will. It has a negative aspect as well as a positive one. So the negative aspect could be to be rude, to be this kind of thing, which is not the thing I'm talking about. But the positive thing is it's a kind of a very go-to approach. In a way, chutzpah is a way of thinking. It's a way of doing business. And also it's a kind of way of interacting with people. It's an attitude. Maybe that's the word I was looking for. It's an attitude and a mindset that you have. If you implement it the right way, in the right places, and in the right amount, not to exaggerate with it and not too much, it can actually do miracles. It's a very kind of powerful mindset to have.
So I started jotting down at first I thought to myself, well, I'll just wait for this call and I won't look up the definition. I won't read too much of your book, but things change. So I started writing down things from your book and whatnot. I'm thinking, okay, kind of this denial of the long odds, to be daring, to have the guts, this presumption plus arrogance. And before we even get into Israel examples, why don't we pick a big one that everyone knows and let you kind of interweave how chutzpah would weave into somebody like a Steve Jobs?
He had a lot of it. I also quote Guy Kawasaki, who was working at Apple at the time, and he had a nice kind of definition of chutzpah. He said that it's like calling a tech support to report a bug on a pirated software. Not only you stole the software, you're now coming up, want the tech support to help you. But I think any good entrepreneur, by the way, have this chutzpah, whether they're aware of it or not, or whether they define it this way or not. Steve Jobs, he had a lot of chutzpah because he was challenging industries. And I think that's part of the thing that any good entrepreneur is doing. And we can expand on that. But he was start with the PC world. He was challenging the 3D animation world. He came up with a completely new concept. He said, whatever was before the 2D, not good enough, we can do something much better. He was challenging the whole music industry when he came with the iPod. Then he challenged the whole mobile phones. Huge industries. Usually an entrepreneur, in the good case, managed to challenge one industry in a successful manner. He did it once and again. Take the iPhone. Steve Jobs had this, he said, you know what? Yeah, there's all these, Nokia was huge in 2000. Ericsson, we have all these big brands. They dominate 90% of the market, and the others are not minor names. They are Sony, there are other kind of LG, these kind of companies that penetrated into the mobile phone world. And he said, you know what? They don't get it right. I think I can do better than all of them, and I can actually come up with a concept that nobody thought about it before, because I think I can understand what the user actually wants. They want a bigger screen. They want to actually use the web, social media, etc., in a much more friendly manner than to click on the things on the phone, and I will give a large screen. There will be no buttons. It was a huge revolution. There will be all sorts of things that you can do with a finger on the phone to enlarge and to minimize, etc. He challenged a huge industry, a very competitive one, and he kind of won the jackpot in that manner because he said that's how it should be done. And if you take the music industry, he kind of turned the whole music industry upside down. He said no more LPs, no more CDs. The currency is a tune. It's a 3-minute tune. That's what I want to buy. I don't want to buy, don't make me buy 10 tunes if I only want one. And it's really revolutionizing industries.
It's that attitude to say at the ground level, I can do something different here. Having that belief you can do it. Nothing can stop you. Let's go to the history of this word for a second, though. Take me to the history. Take me back in time. Where did it come from? I mean, exactly.
I was looking it up. I don't think anybody knows exactly where it started. It's a word that's been in the Jewish culture for hundreds of years. It's not something new. And I think that if you look at the Jewish culture back at 1600, 1700, 300, 400, 500 years ago, the way the Jewish people were studying was in something that called the cheder. It's like a few students within a room. You kind of argue. There's no teacher that teaches you things. There is, the rabbi teaches you. But what you are actually encouraged to do is to say something new, to actually almost contradict him in a way. If you have a different way of looking at the same thing, i.e. the Bible in that case, or the Mishnah, or the Talmud, the Jewish learnings, you are actually being encouraged to kind of challenge the authority, so to speak. One would look from the side and say, oh, this is chutzpah in a way. If you look at Eastern cultures, for example, it's a big no-no to challenge the authority. One above you, you cannot challenge or contradict them. the Jewish actually culture, you are encouraged to do that. You are encouraged to think differently. You are encouraged to challenge whatever everybody said before you, no matter how big they were, in terms of how smart rabbis and teachers. I think that the concept, but again, there is a very thin line between challenging your rabbi and being rude. So you have to be careful. And again, the word chutzpah covers both. You can be chatzuf in Hebrew, you can be kind of rude, but you can have chutzpah in a good way. So it's really how you use this kind of manner in a way, or this characteristics, whether you're using it in a negative way or a positive way, and it has both of them in the same word.
I can still think back to being age 16, and I was in the opposite environment to what you just described. I was in an environment where, here's the dogma, Mike, shut the F up, listen to me, don't you say a word, and if you say a word, we're kicking you out of this class, which happened to me multiple times. And I'm not exaggerating. I had this natural, maybe it wasn't natural, I don't know how I got it, but I was very skeptical. I was not there in that room to listen to someone tell me some dogma where it was painfully obvious to everyone in the room that there was a weak Achilles heel to the dogma, and we were supposed to all pretend that the Achilles heel was not blinking lights at us, and we were supposed to ignore it. So I really do love the word.
As you're saying, it's much more than a word. It's a mindset. It's almost a way of life, if you will, in terms of how you react. And I think that people who are, in a way, maybe, you're probably some kind of a rebel a bit within you, and you're not accepting everything as it is. And this is exactly what Chutzpah is about. It's about challenging reality. It's about challenging the status quo. It's about saying whatever is out there, it doesn't necessarily has to continue to be there. I have an idea that I think it will do better. When it comes to technology, obviously you have the technology to actually support these ideas and say, okay, they didn't have this technology, I have this technology, let's do something better. Coming back to Steve Jobs and the iPhone, they had some really interesting new technologies implemented into this machine, to this product. This kind of a combination of a mindset of looking at the world it's not a criticizing way, it's kind of a open way, and saying the fact that they have been doing that for the last, 20 years or 200 years. It doesn't mean that's the right way to do, or it doesn't mean that's the only way to do it. Any good startup would actually challenge the category or the industry in a way, or the subcategory that it functions in. In order to do that, you need to have this mindset. Otherwise, you will just maybe you'll do an evolutionary thing, but you wouldn't do a revolutionary thing.
Okay, go ahead for the audience, and for me too. Give me the Israeli tech startup digital scene. What's been going on? What's the pivot point? When did it start? I've not been to Israel yet. I'm sure as hell willing to go. But what's the pivot point, and where are we today? And why is this relatively small population country with obviously a lot of brains, but this small population country is really doing a lot of ass kicking in the tech scene these days, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. We're the second largest hub after the Silicon Valley in the world. We have the highest density of startups per capita in the world, highest venture capital per capita in the world. So it's a very, very vibrant ecosystem. I think probably tech-wise, the pivoting point were around 92, 93, where the government came up with a program called the Yozma program. It's initiative in Hebrew. They kind of kicked off the venture capital industry in Israel.
Right before the AOL discs started coming out, before Netscape went public, Israel, the government was already setting in motion kind of their view of how tech should unfold.
Exactly. And they said, if you bring 12 million, we'll give you 8 million and you can create a venture capital. And there were about 10 VCs at the time that started back in 93. JVP, the one I was a partner at, was also one of them. And these funds, most of them did really well because they kind of invested in really good companies. At the time, it was more about communication. It was a lot about taking military kind of technologies and civilizing them or making them for the open market, not the military one. Then came the big bang on the 2000, and a lot happened then. A lot of exits, a lot of money was made, and the whole industry actually came about. I think that's technology-wise. Historically, I would take it even back further. If you look at the making of the Israeli state as a nation, it's really interesting because you can actually have an interesting kind of parallel or comparison between a startup and the state of Israel. And I would say that actually maybe it's in our DNA. The reason I'm saying that, behind any startup, usually you would have a good visionary guy. And in the case of Israel, it was a guy called Binyamin Ze'ev Herzl, who lived in Europe in the 19th century. And he came up with the concept that the Jewish people should have a state of their own. And he had this tagline, so to speak. He said, Im tirtzu en agada. If you will, it can happen. You just want to want it. He was kind of the visionary behind the startup, let's call it for a minute. He wasn't that operational, which is sometimes is the case of startups, where the visionary guy is not necessarily the CEO of the company. And then there were World War II, and there are some other historical events. And then there was this guy called Ben Gurion. He was Israel's first prime minister, but he said in 1948, we should declare a state. Let's start it. Yeah, we don't have the roads, we don't have education system yet, we don't have the health system yet, we don't have the army yet, we don't have much. But let's just start it, and we'll figure it out on the way, just like a startup does. Startup don't have a product, they don't have a biz dev, they don't have a marketing, they don't have R&D, but they start the startup, they start the company and figure it out on the way. I would say that in some manners, we're still figuring it out until today. We haven't figured everything out yet. And in a way, I think that Israel as a state, because we are kind of surrounded by quite a lot of enemies, there is kind of a mindset of, it's not a survival mindset in a bad sense, but it is something that we don't have like a 300-400 years of history as a country. We have as people, 2,000, 5,000 years. But as a country, it's a new country. So we're kind of thinking like a startup. Yeah, we'll figure it out. There is an issue. We'll sort it out. We can improvise, and we can talk about that in a minute, because that's a lot to do with the chutzpah and the mindset, I think, of any entrepreneur. We'll figure it out. And I think that's also part of the DNA that we have as Israelis. And then when we implement it into the startups, that's powerful.
Let me pick your mind for something that, I don't know, maybe people think this is controversial, but here we are, we're talking about Israel, a culture, a group of people, a certain homogeneity. Now, I'm calling you from Vietnam, and I've spent many years here. If you spend a lot of time in Vietnam, you see a lot of homogeneity. If you spend a lot of time in Malaysia, a lot of homogeneity. A lot of time in China, a lot of homogeneity. If I flip back and I go to my home country, okay, maybe there's a lot of homogeneity in Silicon Valley, but America's not a very homogeneous place. Would you care to offer any views about, because America's the great melting pot, it's the great experiment that everyone's celebrated for so long. Would you care to offer any views on the tribal aspects of so many long-standing countries, like some that I just mentioned, Israel, etc., long-standing countries with cultural roots and a certain homogeneity? It really does seem like there can be a lot of power when you have a unified group, where they're unified people and there's perhaps less internal conflict, because everyone's kind of like brothers and sisters in a way. Do you want to touch that?
Yeah, I would challenge that, actually, definitely in the Israel. I mean, Israel is still, even though we are one nation and one country, there's a lot of internal conflicts, internal tribes almost, I would say, and a lot of arguments. It's an interesting thing because we can like fight between right and left wing politics, secular and religious people. People came from Europe, people came from Africa. There's all sorts of internal kind of conflicts and discussions and arguments, which can get heated sometime. But in a time of crisis, and this is an interesting point, whether there's a war, we all come together. People may shout it on the road if you bypass them in the wrong way or whatever. But if you need help, many people come to help you. They don't know you. They don't know who you are. They will jump and help you. There is this kind of, I would say, deep connection, which doesn't necessarily is apparent on the surface. Because on the surface, you will see, somebody told me that, actually a guy from New York told me for the first time he went into a meeting where there were a few Israelis said, and he said, "Why are you fighting?" And we said, "We're not fighting, we're just talking." He thought it was so loud and physical and verbal, we were like using our hands.
You would never scare me if I was in the room.
there is these internal conflicts, but I think that there is some kind of a deeper thing which kind of connects us as a people, which in times of crisis, we all come together. I think that, again, if you look at the power of focus overall, when you look at startup, for example, or the tech scene in Israel and the ecosystem, we all came together. So that's part of the reason that I think that we're successful, because it's not just about the Israeli thing, because you have other ecosystems around the world, but it's a very, very connected ecosystem. So you have the talent, you have the startups, you have the investors, you have the multinationals, you have the government, you have the academia, and they all work together. It's not separated, it's not scattered, it's one strong ecosystem that one feeds the other. If you kind of connect that ecosystem together with this Israeli bondness, so to speak, that makes it, I think, very strong.
Let me shift you into some startup talk. So you're sitting there, venture capital firm, angel guy. You're looking at the screen. You're looking at the screen, so to speak, and you've got XYZ amount of dollars, and you've got XYZ amount of opportunities in front of you. You now allocate money to 20 young bucks that have rolled into the room and told you they got the next best thing compared to sliced bread. I mean, they've got it figured out. And you do your due diligence and you figure out, I've got 20 bets on these 20 individuals and their tech startup idea. What's the math for me? You're going to make those 20 bets. What's going to happen at the end of year 3? Or you pick the year, but at what point in time are you going to know success and failure? What's the math look like? What's the win-loss kind of?
A quick on, because the way you kind of illustrated it reminds me some kind of big Hollywood producer that sits with a big fat cigar and a large armchair. It's not the case. You're part of the team. It's not that you're an outsider and you're looking and you're deciding who would live and who not. That's not the way, at least I'm not looking at it.
But the math is still going to work out. I mean, the 20 are not going to all be winners.
There's all sorts of statistics, but overall, I think that if you look at a VC, a typical VC, I would say, it's probably would be that 30% of the startups will probably fail, i.e. shut down. 30% more or less would be okay. They will return the investment, let's say break even, let's call it. Another 30% will make a nice multiple, maybe 3, 4, 5x on the money. And then you need this 10%, let's say 1 out of 10, that will be a home run, a really nice 20, 30, 40x on the money. That's kind of the unicorns that you have. There's all sorts of names for that. Usually we call it's a fund returner. So you have one company that returns the whole fund plus. And you never know this in advance. You don't know who would be the home run. All the 20, as you mentioned at the start, have the potential. Hopefully you've done the due diligence and you have the good team and the market is interesting, etc. They all have a good chance to start with. But as the market goes, I would say within 18 to 24 months, you know where they are. I would say it really depends on which stage you are investing, because there's a big difference if you're investing in a pre-seed seed company. Then it may take 2-3 years to know whether they got it right, product market fit, understanding the market, competition, technology, etc. But if you're investing in an A round, B round company, they already should have some kind of revenue, they have a business model, they already have some kind of a go-to-market strategy. So then within a year, 18 months, you should know whether they're on their growth. Having said that, there's no insurance behind it because the market changes, the technology changes, the competition changes, and the pace that it changes is really quick. It's not only that the company will be on the right track to success, they need to make sure to take it all the way. It's not a 100-meter run. It's not sure it's a marathon, but it's definitely a long distance one. And you need to make sure that you have your finger on the pulse all the time on the market. You have to tweak your product. You have to change the proposition. You have to be flexible with the pricing sometimes. You need to do a lot of things in order to make sure that you're on the right track all the time. Because if you don't, you may lose the market very quickly.
Let me phrase it to you this way. You outline a great strategy I relate to, diversification. But those people, the individuals that are running the startups, they're about as non-diversified as it can possibly be.
They shouldn't be. They should be completely focused.
But they also know the odds too, right? It's an interesting conundrum. they kind of realize that you've got a portfolio strategy and you're kind of in that position with a diversification to kind of withstand. They realize they're on the ledge and it's sink or swim.
Right. But they believe that they would be the one who will succeed. Otherwise, they wouldn't start it.
It's an interesting psychology to have both of those individuals in the same camp working at it together. It's very different mentalities.
It's true, but mind that when you are investing in a company and you're sitting on their board, you are now 100% part of the company, and you would do anything to make the company succeed. You don't think, and you shouldn't think, as a board member in the eyes of the investor. You should think in the eyes of the board on this company's board. In a way, I think venture capitalists has this kind of two different hats that they should really know how to control well. When you are in the company, you're 100% in the company, even though you don't have an operational role. You're not the CEO or some kind of a VP, but you are totally committed to this company and you want it to succeed. So it's not that you give up and you say, they're not good, I'm happy with the other 19 or whatever. You always fight until your last bullet with every company that you have.
Give me an example. You pick the example, you pick the individual. They came to you sometime recent. They pitched you. You made an investment in them. You liked the chutzpah. There was some great chutzpah. Give me the story of that person that came in. Perhaps it was something not on your radar at all, and they won you over. Talk about them, their personality, the chutzpah they had to win you over, and perhaps the direction they are going with their particular firm, their particular product.
I can give an example of, it's actually all the way, so it's a nice example. I think a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, there was a company, there was an entrepreneur who came, two entrepreneurs actually, and came and said that they've developed a really unique technology, an NLP technology, natural language processing, that can understand what is being written. And that's a combination of NLP, AI, artificial intelligence, deep learning, all these kind of buzzwords in the tech industry, but they were actually building it. They had a really smart algorithm that can understand text. They weren't sure what they want to do with it, but they said, we have the best, and there are other NLP companies around the world. Some of them are quite large. And we can understand stuff that Amazon doesn't understand or Apple doesn't understand. And said, okay, you're shooting high. That's good. Test the technology first. And we did. And actually, they had this really amazing algorithm. But then they weren't sure exactly what is it that they want to do with it. We sat down and said, okay, what text do we want to understand? And after quite a few sessions, we came out and we kind of narrowed it down to the reviews segment. Because what's happening today with reviews, you have thousands of reviews. You cannot read all those reviews. You get these stars, 3, 4, 5 stars. And it's very, very primitive in a way when you come to think of it.
It's not changed on Amazon for 15 years, 16 years.
Exactly. And so they said, let's challenge this review industry. And again, Amazon was definitely one of the things we were looking at. They came up with a very, very smart algorithm that you put in on your site. It had 2 elements to it. One is that it can actually give you a certain element within the product that you're interested in. For example, they took millions or tens of millions of reviews, and they said, okay, let's say you want to buy a laptop. What is it that you want to know? Do you want to know the reviews about the screen, about the speaker, about the weight, about the battery, and then you can actually say, okay, I want only the reviews about the batteries and give me the results in percentage, how many people said the battery is good versus not good, etc. So you can actually drill down to certain element within the product. So you can search, for example, you want a vacuum cleaner that is good for pets' hair. Nobody tells you that today because nobody has the data, but they did because they reviewed millions of reviews and they heard people or they analyzed the text that people wrote that this is a great thing for pets' hair or a trolley to run on the beach. Which one's the best? So they got this really interesting insights into the product. Once they had that, they were industry agnostic. They just look at the text. Hotel industry, for example, huge, by the way, booking, etc. They had a lot of reviews. But if you want, I don't know, does this hotel fits for a honeymoon? I don't know. How's the breakfast? How's the cushions in this hotel? Apparently, there's a lot of people writing about cushions in hotels. I didn't realize that until we started analyzing.
Not me. I will not write a review of a cushion for the rest of my life.
But
there are people doing it, apparently. Maybe I'll use their cushion review at some point in time. I'll just never write one.
Yeah, but again, there are people who search for pillow reviews or whatever, how good the pillows are, how good the breakfast is. They came up with a solution. Eventually, there was a lot of interest from very large corporations, US corporations. I can't name them all, but because they really like this technology, they actually did challenge this kind of industry, as they said. Walmart bought them. They had a nice exit. We had a nice exit, and now they're part of Walmart. So Walmart actually realized that this kind of approach that can look into millions or tens of millions of reviews on the product can actually convert. And maybe that's the most important thing, because they proved that these reviews can convert in a much better percentage than without these reviews. So you have like an A/B testing. They put their reviews on 50% of the pages, didn't put on the other. And you could see that on the 50% that they've used their technology, the conversion rate was much higher and people actually bought much more product than without it. Amazon is in this business. Walmart is in this business. All the big players. Having said that, they didn't have this very specific technology that kind of revolutionizing this sub-industry.
If I take you back in time, so we go back to the early 90s, I think that's roughly your start of the career?
Yeah, a bit later. Yeah.
So we start to roll through, though. I think one of the most interesting things about the mid-90s, watching Netscape go public, Andreessen was like kind of a rock star then. He was like him and Steve Case, and all these amazing things start to happen, these products, so many failures, a few winners. I mean, gosh, there's how many search engines did I use before Google was ever on the scene, right? Here we are now in 2020, and you are a guy that's making VC investments, angel investments, and of course, you want to imagine that one of the things that you're going to put money into is going to become as big as an Apple, a Netflix, an Amazon, a Facebook, a Google. Everyone wants to imagine that. Is it possible anymore? Or have those 5 companies, maybe there's another 1 or 2 that add to that list, have those 5 companies built moats in such a way that there's not going to be competition? There's just going to be, as you described, exits. Young folks, they're going to come up with these great ideas. You're going to fund them. Maybe you guys will make a boatload of money, really successful. The fund's going to have a great return. But is there going to ever be, any time in the near future, something that comes along to challenge these big names I just rattled off?
Before going into the VC world, I was working for Microsoft. I was the CEO of MSN in Israel, and I had the opportunity to spend some time at the time with Steve Ballmer and Bill Gates. And early 2000,
they struggled.
Yeah, but you still would have asked, who can challenge Microsoft, Apple? That was before Google kind of had the big breakthrough, etc. And it was before the big mobile thing happened, which they kind of missed. But when you look back, you said, who can challenge Microsoft? They have the search, they have the browser, they have the operating system. Who can challenge them? And then, lo and behold, came the mobile, and they didn't react right in terms of operating system. And you have 2 completely different operating systems. When you think historically, Microsoft should have been one of them, but they're not. I think the fact that you have these big giants now, it looks like nobody can challenge them. But I think if you look at history, anybody can be challenged. Coming back to the Nokia example, they were unbeatable in the 2000s, and they kind of almost disappeared in a few years. I think the market is changing. Technologies are changing. I'm sure that there will be new large companies that will challenge these companies, maybe in different fields. So it may come from the food industry, food tech stuff. It may be from the medical, digital health kind of space that somebody will take over, and they will kind of have to react, and not necessarily, telemedicine is now growing very big. It doesn't necessarily mean that somebody will have a better search engine or a better social platform. Not sure. You see TikTok and all these guys are coming in.
Let me push you a little bit more on that, though. So if it's not going to be something that knocks Google off or knocks Apple off or Netflix, et cetera, and they continue to build piles of cash, Amazon is in businesses now on the server side, hosting and whatnot. These companies have the ability to just stop in their tracks the new competitor in whatever industry because they've got cash piles. They're like God piles of money. Am I crazy by asking you this?
No, you're right. But again, history showed that cash is not enough to keep your leadership in a market. It definitely helps you because you can maybe buy talent, you can buy companies, but it's not necessarily an insurance policy that you will keep your position in the top of the hill, because it may come from left field and you wouldn't be ready for it. If you look at Amazon, they started a bookstore and they became this huge logistics company. It's not even it's obviously in e-commerce, but their logistics is amazing. So they kind of also transform into this thing that they can have this moving around the world in such a effective way that you would even imagine it. I think nobody have in the 90s when they just came, that this will be the company. I think that the tech is growing so fast. I think that there's all sorts of new technologies, whether it's, for example, not to bore you with too much technology, there's a new space called bioconvergence, which is kind of a combination between biotech, physics, high tech, AI, which is kind of highly personalized thing that will transform a lot of the healthcare industry, for example.
Give me an example of how that could happen so the audience can understand, once you get all past all the buzzwords, what exactly the end product could be that we could all benefit from.
Tissue printing, for example, 3D tissue printing, or there is drug delivery. Let's say today, if you're taking some kind of a medicine or a drug, it's almost like sending a pizza guy without an address. It's like, all right, you go in this large body and try to fix whatever is not working. Now, when you will have nano robots going with a drug, and they will know exactly within your blood, going to the right place with the right amount of drug, with the right kind of drug that fits your DNA, your genes, your history, or whatever, then it's a completely new world.
That's a radically new world, huh?
We're getting there. It's not like science fiction. There's technology that are actually already in FDAs and all these kind of things that are happening. There's a company that is doing, it's called nanodrops. They take drops, they do this little thing in your eye, and then they put drops and it actually substitutes lenses. So you don't need to wear that. You just put a couple of drops every few days and you don't need lens or glasses. Again, this is kind of completely revolutionizing a whole industry, because once that will catch up in the market, who wouldn't prefer to have some drops in their eye every 4 or 5 days and not wear glasses or contact lenses? You have these kind of very new concepts that are kind of combining biology, high tech, AI, these kind of things, and revolutionizing some of our world. Everybody was talking about autonomous car, which is much more easy to understand, but it's also kind of revolutionizing the whole industry. Why should I have a car? If I can just whistle a car, it'll come pick me up and I go wherever I want. I don't need to drive. What does that mean to the whole transportation business? I think these technologies, whether they are AI, computer vision, very heavy computing that's happening in a very short time, I think we're in front of a decade that will be so many dramatical revolutions in the food industry, in the agriculture industry, in the medical that I mentioned, in logistics, in transportation. If we will talk in 10 years' time, you'll say, wow, that was one hell of a decade. A bit what like happened, I think, in the 2000s. If you compare 2010 to 2000, that was so many revolutions happened and still are happening. I think definitely with that.
When you outline it like you just did, with me giving you kind of the naive approach of saying, oh, here's these 5 massive companies, and I might end up being right. But when you outline it like you just did, I think that allows the audience to imagine, oh, okay, if some of that stuff that Yuri just said unfolds, I can imagine that changes the world overnight.
It may. Can definitely may.
Yeah.
You have these cells that you grow a steak, or I've seen a product that prints a hamburger.
Now, listen, I got to stop you there. I don't want my hamburger printed, okay? It's not going to taste right. I'm telling you, the first 20 years of the 3D printed hamburger is not going to be, it's going to be brutal.
Would you agree to have your heart printed? That's the next phase.
Let me ask you the science fiction question, though, because if you're going to go to the printed hearts, I'm going to ask you the question about pitches in a second. You've probably heard every pitch under the sun, and I want to kind of find out when people do pitch you good and bad, the feeling and how you judge and whatnot. Keep it at the science fiction for a moment. I had an author on this podcast a few years back, and he was talking about the moment where we have this artificial intelligence equal to human and all that kind of stuff. He kind of outlined a scenario. He said, well, listen, it's not going to be that we're going to create a robot, so to speak, that'll be just an equal or better than us. He postulated, he said, when we're able to scan the human mind and put our mind, our consciousness on a drive, and then we live in virtual reality, there we go. Then we have life extension. Does that ever cross your plate?
You do think when you're kind of seeing so much happening in the artificial world and the machine learning, now there's all sorts of technologies that are coming up in AI that the software can actually write a new software. We talked about understanding text, understanding what is it that you want. So in a way, we're growing this new brain, so to speak. And I think that in that perspective, definitely there's a lot of things that the machines or the computers will be able to do better than us. They already do in many industries.
If we can get your consciousness out of your 6 inches between your ears and it goes on a drive, that's the game changer. Because
it's kind of the Matrix thing.
Right.
But who told you we're not already there?
Well, that's where I was leading. How do we know we're already not in the simulation?
Exactly. So, I don't know. Yeah, religious aspects for that or scientific, you can never know. Maybe we're just one big video game that we're living in within this consciousness thing. I don't know if you've seen Westworld, the show. So, yeah.
It's not out of the realm of possibility.
Kind of intellectual play now, but I do think that definitely we are, and the computer, the next kind of versions of quantum computing and all these will enable almost like a mind. One of the things I've heard was that a lot of the things that in technology or in the body were understood once there was some kind of a technology. So the heart, people who actually research hearts, understood what a heart is once there was a pump. When they saw a pump, they said, oh, this is how the heart works. Same with the eye and the camera. And so I think the brain, in a way, now that we're understanding how neural networks work, how memories, we will start understanding how the brain works. And then we can actually maybe in some stage, we'll be able to manufacture some kind of a brain that will be able to do a lot of the things that we're doing today. However, having said that, I think we're still a long way from having this brain be as creative as humans can be. So in a way, I think that no matter how much technology there will be out there, the creativity behind the humankind will probably be one of the main competitive advantages that our species will have versus the machines. If somebody would ask, what should kids be learning or what would be they when they grow up? As long as it's something that has to do with a creative mind, with a flexible mind, with ideas, with new concepts, this is something that probably computers will not have in the next foresee future.
Okay, I got one last question for you. For all these young folks that I've met in the last handful of years that are always coming up with their idea, they want to pitch it, etc. I can't imagine how many pitches you've had. Some probably great, some probably so bad you remember them because they were so bad. What's the worst thing someone can do? The worst thing someone can do when they come into the room or they got this initial introduction to you, what are some of the worst things they can do at the outset that leave you with that taste where you're like, oh, I just can't get past this taste? What are the things that people can just stop doing right now?
They're probably in 3 different levels. One is on the team level. First of all, if you don't have the passion, a real passion, not say that you have a passion. If you're truly not passionate about what you're doing, it shows. I cannot put a finger on somebody. It's like American Idol. You don't know why they're good, but they're good. It's the same with entrepreneurs. You feel the passion, and it's kind of contagious in many cases. They must have passion. If they're there just for the exit, just for the money, they're not in the right place. They wouldn't survive this roller coaster called a startup. I would say a genuine passion is something that definitely they should have. So that's one thing. In terms of the team itself, the interaction between the team is very important because sometimes you have the CEO and you have 3 entrepreneurs, one of them or founders, and one of them the CEO, the other one is a VP of R&D, and the other one is a biz dev. You see the interaction between them during the meeting. If the CEOs shush them up or shut them out, say, oh, no, I'll take that. He wouldn't let them speak. Or you see the interaction between them is not a good one. You see that. Investors look at that because this is the team you're going to work with for a few good years. You want to make sure that you're joining a good team, that there's a chemistry between themselves. And obviously later, you should have the chemistry with them. I would say on the professional side, on the market side, maybe that's another layer. You want them to make sure that they know the competition inside out. If you ask them a question about a company or about somebody in their space and they don't know about it or they don't give you a good answer, that's a bad sign. They need to really live inside and out their market. Also need to be very focused on what is it they want to do on the market, because some startups have the technology and say, oh, we can do this, and this. And you don't want to hear that. You want to say, all right, what is it that you think is the best thing that you're going to do and how you're going to go to market with it? Knowing the market and understanding what's the right go-to-market is very important. And the last level, I would say, it's on the product level. They should really understand why their product have a competitive advantage that will enable them to win the market in the category that they're in it. And again, you have some companies say, yeah, we're doing this, but there's 5 other companies who are doing the same. Or maybe, some large companies can do that as well. You want to have this edge that they have that the others don't have. It's not everlasting thing, but you should have 12 months, 18 months with a patent, without a patent, doesn't matter. But they should really be on top of that, on the product that they're building, and should make sure that they keep this competitive edge to what they do. And maybe last point on that, they need to have a high sense of urgency. I've seen startups that are we're kind of hanging out. We like the startup scene. We're going to conferences. We do that. But they don't have this, what we call in Hebrew, the knife between their teeth. They're not ready to charge on the market. You need to have a really high sense of urgency, because somebody is building a very similar product to what you are building, whether you are aware of that or not. You need to run as fast as you can and then accelerate and then run even faster in order to win the market. If you will have kind of draw along in the market, it wouldn't go. Somebody will outbeat you, outcompete you in the market. The sense of urgency is, again, it's something that you feel. It's not something that they say. It's something that you see how they have their plan, how they have their product, how they're going to build their MVP, the minimum viable product, how fast they're going to go to the market. What's the challenge they're after? Who are they talking to? What kind of energy they have in terms of this urgency to get to the market? And even if they don't get it right at first, and they probably won't, they need to run fast. I think these are the things that, as an investor, at least myself, if I don't see them or I don't feel them, usually it's kind of a sign to maybe consider another alternative.
I'm going to read these really quick. These are from your book. These are kind of your 6 rules of Chutzpah. Challenging reality, challenging that status quo, dominating the market category you're after or create it, number 2. Number 3, foresee the future. You got to innovate to meet the demand. What does the market need, even if it doesn't know it yet, which I love that. How many things have we seen in the last 20 years that were all about that? Number 5, bend the rules, which you've been talking about. Number 6, show, don't tell. What's a good example of show, don't tell in your mind as we wind down?
A good example, there's a company I mentioned in the book called Theta Ray. It's a fintech company that has this very, very strong algorithm of anomaly detection. What anomaly detection means is that they can look at big data and tell you what is not normal in this data, do it automatically in huge amount of data. Now, they kind of focus in the fintech market. They work with a lot of banks around the world and money laundering, these kind of issues. The way they sell the product in many cases, they have this black box, let's call it, and they go to a company, a bank, and say, okay, give us whatever data you want. Don't tell us what the data is. Put there some anomalies. Don't tell us what they are, and we'll find that within a click of a button. And then things that took months for companies to realize, and in some cases they missed it, they just demonstrate, they show it. You say, we put it in our black box. There you go. These are the anomalies. Now, the interesting thing is that in these demonstrations, they found sometimes anomalies that the client themselves even weren't aware of, that were in the data. When you show that, it's much, much more powerful than just saying, I have this anomaly engine that I can find anomaly. Just show it. So whatever you have, once you can show it, even if it's in some kind of an early stage, if you can show that it works, that's much more powerful. If you have a good demo, go for the demo. Forget the deck, or you can have the deck later. But that's the best kind of way to sell your product, is actually to show it, to demonstrate it, rather to talk about it.
Speak to this one last issue. It just kind of hit me. It's in your work. You talk about the 3-person multinational. With a lot of tech these days, and as you're talking about products being driven by an algo, I mean, you really can be in a situation where a very small number of people can be running an extremely powerful multinational company, huh?
True. But what I'm saying with the 3-person multinational is the mindset. Again, when you start a company, and I've seen all sorts of examples for that, you have entrepreneurs, sometimes, by the way, in large countries, Brazil or Germany or large countries that have very large domestic market. Then these companies are kind of focusing on their local market and they're not thinking globally. They're not looking at the global competition. Their benchmark is local, it's not global. And that's not the way to build a good startup. So in the Israeli case, because we have such a small market, we always look at the international market from day one. So when you are looking at a market and when you're developing your startup, you should beat whatever the competition is out there globally. It's not enough to beat the local market. You should think of the global as your market. Definitely, you should spread at day one. In the Israeli case, I would say the US is probably the default market to go to. Companies are going there after 12, 18 months after inception in Israel, or they actually move there to start the company as well. Because in many cases, this is the most interesting market to look at. But the mindset is an international one. Another small example, all the exchanges within the company should be in English. We all know Hebrew, we all speak Hebrew, we all interact, funnily enough, in English because you want the company to have an international language. You want to work within this language. Obviously, the presentations are in English. Again, it's a global mindset, and you should have this global mindset from the inception. And even though you're small, and even though you have just 3-4 people in the company, or maybe you just fundraise the first million or whatever, yeah, you're not a multinational, but you should think like one. And as we talked earlier, your competitors are Amazon or Google or Apple. These are your competitors. It's not just another startup down the alley. You should take this into account. Again, when you have this mindset, and this is kind of a nice closure to our beginning of the call about Chutzpah, when you have this chutzpah to say, I'm not afraid to actually compete with these giants and I can build something that I think would be better than what they have, then this global kind of perspective, you're not intimidated by it. Actually, it maybe even energizes you to actually build this product and beat them to the market.
Very cool stuff, Yuri. I could probably sit here and pick your mind on all kinds of angles and examples
Thanks,
for
man.
hours and hours and hours. The book is The Unstoppable Startup, Mastering Israel's Secret Rules of Chutzpah. Very cool stuff.
Thank you very much.
The word is not a word that's unknown to me, but I've not used it for eons. But I think now you have permanently imprinted it back onto my forehead for regular usage. So I love it.
You will do a little exercise. Whenever you are doing something with nice chutzpah or you spot something, you say, oh, all right, that was a good example of chutzpah. Now it's the time for me to use some of this chutzpah and actually practice that, not necessarily working according to the strict rules, etc. So again, as I say, it's a mindset. And once you understand this mindset, you can really easily adopt it and actually start implementing that.
Hey, if people want to come find you, the book they can find at all the normal places they buy books. If they want to find you, where would you like to direct people to?
LinkedIn probably would be the best place.
Okay, cool. Thank you for taking some time today. I hope you enjoyed my taking you around the maypole.
Yeah, very much so.
Everywhere you might not possibly imagine, I try to take you.
All right. Thanks, man. Appreciate that.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.